Good morning, boys and girls. It is Thursday, and we're going to continue to read and find out what is going on. Chapter 26, Spruce Sees What's Bad. A cheerful spruce continued to amble along, reassured that he was truly heading towards Glitter Creek. Hadn't the rabbit said so? Besides, it felt good being out in the forest on his own. None of his brothers or sisters would have done so. Yes, the rabbit's warning puzzled him, but everybody knew that rabbits were skittish. What could possibly be so bad? Well, yes, the heat was awful still, but maybe it's a fox, thought Spruce. Maybe it's an owl. Maybe it's a human. Maybe it's nothing. But the rabbit was just being timid. Not like me, Spruce told himself with pride. A little further on, the trees thinned out so that Spruce could see a good deal of the sky. The more he saw it, the hazier the sky appeared, rather like a fog. Was that what the rabbit was thinking of as bad? Some fog? Bruce snorted with scorn. But as the young mouse continued to stroll along the path, he became increasingly aware of a strange smell in the air. It tickled his nose, made an itch. Was it that, he wondered? Was that what the rabbit was referring to as something bad? A stink? As Spruce pressed on, the strange smell grew stronger. His eyes began to smart. Then his throat became irritated. He coughed a few times. There was just a break in the trees ahead. A tired Spruce hoped it would be the creek. When he got there, he would take a quick look about for Grandma Poppy. If he did not find her, he would go home. A few minutes later, he stepped out of the woods and onto the bank of Glitter Creek. The path he'd been following had led him to the old wooden bridge that crossed the creek. On the dimwood forest side of the bridge, not far from where Spruce emerged from the forest, stood an old, dead, and charred tree. It looked as if it had been struck by lightning a long time ago. As for the bridge, it was nothing more than decaying wood planks placed side by side and thrown across the creek bed. But on the far side of the bridge, on a hill, was a steady boil of what looked like a cloud. But was a cloud that puffed, bellowed, and churned with fierce energy. The cloud was quite dark in some spots. In other places, it was white. Swirling above it were big and small white specks, some that drifted up, while others floated aimlessly over the land. As Spruce gazed at it, he saw that within the cloud were red and gold bits, glowing and winking. He heard noises, too, snapping, crackling, and crinkling sounds, as well as steady whoosh of wind. The young mouse stood transfixed. He began to see red, orange, and blue fingers poking out of the cloud, as if pointing everywhere, trying to tear things apart. At the same time, waves of heat washed over him, heat far greater than the summer's high temperatures. The heat seared his ears and nose, singed his whisker tips, and made his eyes blink and tear, forcing him to step back again and again. What is this? Spruce wondered. He began to remember talk from older mice, descriptions and hazy images of smoke, heat, and flames, all of it in tones that suggested something altogether dreadful, something they called fire. Gradually, Spruce began to grasp that what he was seeing must be, had to be, that thing, that fire. Even after Spruce had named what lay before him, he continued to stare, terrified and fascinated at the same time. As Spruce watched, the fire edged toward the far side of the wooden bridge. Bright sparks fell on the old planks. The planks began to smolder, smoke, and then burst into flames. As the young mouse watched, the fire began to cross over the creek. Suddenly, Spruce understood. That fire could catch me. Turning, he dashed back along the path toward home. He had not gone far when he spied a hole particularly hidden beneath a rock. He stopped, went into the hole, and sniffed to make sure no one was in it, that it was safe. He darted to look back. The fire was still there, advancing slowly. He dived down into the hole. Once inside, he turned around and peeked out, watching with a terrified fascination as the fire crept slowly in his direction. Poppy tries to escape. "You pesky, sneaky mouse," yelped Bounder, jumping up and shoving his paw behind the slanting rock as far as he could. "Trying to lull me with your friendly talk." Poppy squirmed farther along the gap. Though it was impossible to stand, she managed to turn about to face the probing paw with its sharp claws. Momentarily, the claw pulled back, only to be replaced by the glaring brown eye of the fox. "You can't get away," Bounder snarled. Next moment, he withdrew his face and shoved his paw in again. Poppy crawled toward the opposite end, but a narrowing of the gap and the roughness of the stone made moving more difficult. Then, even as she approached the end, she saw the fox peering in at her from that side. "Give up," barked Bounder. Poppy scampered back to the middle of the rock. Once there, she took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Bounder was looking in from one side, leaping around, growling and yelping, then looking in from the other side. His barking boomed in Poppy's ears, deafening her. "I'll just have to wait," Poppy said. She hugged herself and tried to push away all thoughts of hunger and thirst. It did not take long before she became aware that the rock slab was shaking. She looked one way and then the other. At the end, closest to the cave entrance and her path of escape, Bounder had wedged his paw deep into the gap. Though still safe from his grasp, it was perfectly clear to Poppy that the fox was trying to topple the slanting stone. If he succeeded, Poppy would be in the open. She would have no choice. She would have to run for it. But which way? The rock moved some more. "Give up gracefully," bade the fox. "Accept your fate." Poppy made up her mind not to go back into the tunnel. He'd only outrun me, she thought. Anyway, there's no real safety that way. My best chance, my only chance, is to get into the opening. At least I'll have room to maneuver. Bounder snorted, snarled, and grunted. The rock shook and moved some more. "I'm going to have to run for it," Poppy warned herself. She put herself in the best position. Then she had a new idea. The last thing he'd expect is if I go directly at him, right into his face. It's risky, but here's hoping. Bounder had shifted the stone enough that he was able to get his two front paws behind it, then his nose. Poppy was sure that it was only a matter of seconds before the rock flopped over. It was already beginning to totter. She braced herself to leap. With a final push, Bounder shoved the rock away from the wall. For a second, it stood upright, teetering. Then it tumbled away from the wall, landing with a noisy clatter. Completely exposed, Poppy leaped right at Bounder's face. Just as she was about to reach his nose, the fox jerked up one of his paws and battered her down to the ground. Turning a somersault, Poppy came down hard. Stunned and groggy, she staggered up, knowing that she must run. For a moment, Bounder was unsure where Poppy had landed and was still searching for her. Poppy dived towards out of the cave's entrance, which opened to Dimwood Forest. "Run," she told herself, "run." But what Poppy saw next brought her to a complete standstill. She was absolutely still, staring with horror. Smoke was rising from Bannock Hill. Amid the smoke were bright red flames. "Fire!" cried a stunned Poppy. "Fire moving toward the forest." Chapter 28. The Bridge to Dimwood Forest. The bridge's decrepit planks, dried out by weeks of drought, burned very quickly. Within moments, the entire bridge broke apart and fell crashing down into a dry creek bed, sending up a cascade of orange sparks and flames that spewed in all directions. Some of the sparks and flames landed on the nearby old dead tree. The ancient tree all but had exploded into flames, burning like an angry, revengeful torch. It burned so fast it only took moments to topple, rumbling down into the denser forest. And when it fell, Dimwood Forest began to burn. what Poppy and Bounder did. Poppy, dumbfounded by the sight of the fire, forgot about Bounder and instead she stared before her. Over Bannock Hill rose great plumes of boiling black and white smoke. Spikes of flames darted through the smoke like snake tongues. Trees were ablaze. Grass was burning furiously. Abruptly, the fox's voice broke into her thoughts, even as his paw came down on her tail. "You stupid mouse," he barked. "You could have gotten away, but now—" "Bounder," cried Poppy, pointing. "Look over there." Bounder turned, looked, and gasped. "Good glory," he cried, lifting his paw from Poppy's tail. It's fire." Side by side, the two animals stared out. "With the forest so dry," Poppy's voice faltered, "everything will be destroyed." Bounder continued, "And everyone who lives there will be—" Poppy went on. "Killed," concluded Bounder. "Bounder," Poppy whispered, "my whole family is down there." "My children are too," the fox replied. "I have to warn them," said Poppy. "But Bounder," she turned to look up at him, "I'll never be able to get there." Bounder stared down at Poppy and then out again toward the fire. Next moment, he lowered his head. "Grab hold of my ear," he cried. "Pull yourself up quickly. We'll need to hurry." She looked up at him, not sure if she understood. "Forget all that," Bounder growled. "This is different. Climb on or I'll leave you." Poppy glanced back at the fire, then turned back around and grabbed one of Boulder's ears, hauled herself up, and worked herself around to set herself just behind his head. "Are you there?" said the fox. "You're so light, I can't feel you." "Here and ready," Poppy exclaimed. "Hold tight," Bounder cried. "If you fall, I'll never know." "Go," Poppy urged. With Poppy clinging to his fur, Bounder plunged down in a great heap, going so fast for all but tumbled down the ridge, body low to the ground, bushy tail streaming behind, neck stretched out, ears pushed back. The fox used his sharp nose to point the way. Charging forward with leaps and bounds over low spots, galloping furiously where it was flat, he raced as fast as he could. Poppy pressed between the fox's ears, tightly gripped tufts of his fur with her forepaws. The on-rushing wind bent her whiskers back and flattened her ears. Every now and then she lifted her head to try to see where they were. But the bushes, trees, and rocks flew by so quickly it was impossible for her to know, or even figure out, what direction they were traveling. It was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. This was so much faster than flying with Lucy, Poppy thought, and much more dangerous. She gripped the fox's fur even tighter. Once, then twice, as Bounder made a sharp turn or took a jump and came down roughly, Poppy almost lost her grip. She had to force herself to concentrate on holding on. Then the fox took another soaring leap. He came down with such a rattling thump. The shock caused Poppy to lose her breath. On and on they went until Boulder suddenly slid to a halt. His whole body trembling, he panted and took gulps of air. and equally breathless, Poppy lifted her head and looked about. They were somewhere in the midst of Dimwood Forest. Thick, heavy smoke coursed in multiple layers, swirling now this way, now that. It stung her eyes and reached into her lungs, making her choke and cough. Its smell was a clotted stench of burning wood and leaves, sickening. "Where are we?" Poppy called out over the crackling and snapping. "Not far from the forest edge," the fox gasped as he tried to regain his breath. "Over there," he pointed with his nose, "is the creek. Where do you want me to take you?" "I need to get home." "Which way is that?" "Is that Glitter Creek ahead?" "Yes." "Do you know the bridge that crosses it?" "Think so." "If you can get me there," said Poppy, "there's a path that will take me home." "Keep holding on," cried the fox, turning and dashing toward the creek. Poppy put her head down. But it wasn't long before Bounder stopped again. "Poppy," he called. "What's the matter?" "We're heading right toward the fire." Poppy sat up and looked. The smoke was thicker, the stench stronger, noises were louder too. She could see flames as awful as the summer's heat had been. The heat from the fire was twice as bad. "How far is the creek?" she called. "Just ahead." "Hopefully the fire hasn't crossed over." "Don't know. I'll try. Here we go. Hang on." As Bounder charged forward, Poppy dropped down again and gripped the fox's fur. The closer they came to the creek, the thicker the smoke, the louder the flames, the hotter the wind. "Here's the creek," cried the fox, coming to a skidding halt. Poppy sat up. She had a fleeting impression that this was the spot where Ereth had almost drowned in the mud, where she had been flipped into the air. But what commanded her attention now was the fire on the far side of the creek. There was smoke, thick black smoke. Even more appalling were the great sheets of flame that reached up like jagged red and yellow claws, ripping furiously at the sky. "Poppy," Bounder barked. "Look over there," he pointed with his nose. The swirling smoke made it hard to see anything clearly, but what Poppy did see squeezed her stomach. The old bridge, its planks engulfed in flames, had collapsed into the dry creek bed. The fire had spread into the forest. Bushes were on fire. So were dry grasses. Entire trees were burning like towering torches. Other trees, glowing red-orange, were tumbling and falling, spewing sparks in all directions, setting even more trees aflame. "Bounder," she cried, "can you see how far the fire has gone?" The fox pranced up on his hind legs and then dropped down. "Can't tell," he said, "but it looks like the fire must have only just jumped the creek." Poppy slid down his neck onto the ground. She looked across Glitter Creek, where the fire raged and roared. Bounder, unaware that Poppy was no longer with him, raced on. Poppy lay still on the ground in the middle of the path. Behind her, the fire continued to spread. Well, Oops, wait a minute. I skipped a page. Hold on. She looked across Glitter Creek where the fire raged and roared. Bannock Hill was no longer visible. She thought of the gray house ruins, her childhood home. She wondered what was happening there, and more importantly, whether her relations were safe. Then she remembered herself. The house ruins were in the open. Surely the mice living there had seen the fire and escaped. Her thoughts turned back to her own family. If the entire dry forest caught fire... There's my path over there, Poppy cried to Bounder. I'm going home. She started off, only to stop and run back to the fox. He looked at her quizzically. What's the matter? Thank you, Bounder, standing on her rear toes. She gave his sharp nose a hug. Bounder stared after Poppy as she began to run down the path. Then he looked at the fire, which was now moving rapidly into the dry forest. Poppy, he barked, can you go faster than the fire? She paused. I'll run. It's burning too fast, said the fox. The heat is too great. Let me take you. Bounder, you've got your own family to find. I don't even know where to start looking, barked the fox. Come on, get back on. Poppy hesitated. Bounder leaped to where Poppy was. Hurry, he barked, pawing the ground with impatience. Bounder, do it, he all but snarled, shoving his nose into hers. Poppy took a leap, landed on the bridge of Bounder's nose, and then ran up to his face, where she had been before, between his ears. This time, however, she stayed high, wanting to be able to direct the fox. Holding on, called Bounder. Yes, straight down the path, unless I tell you otherwise. Here we go, the fox bayed, and started forward with a trot, only to shift into a gallop as he skirted across close to the fire, close enough so that his hair singed. Poppy, clinging to the fox, heard the fire's roaring, cracking ferociously, and she could feel terrible heat on her back. She felt compelled to look, and was all but blinded by the intensity of the flames when she did. Am I going right? barked Bounder. Poppy swung around and shouted, yes. But even as she turned, she lost her grip. The next moment, she tumbled to the ground, striking her head. Bounder, unaware that Poppy was no longer with him, raced on. Poppy lay still on the ground in the middle of the path. Behind her, the fire continued to spread. Oh my, it's even worse than I thought it was, because we didn't know she fell off, and she's laying there. Wow. What do you think is going to happen? Well, it sounds like the whole forest is going to be totally ruined, but I hope everybody's families can be saved. We'll have to wait till tomorrow. Goodbye.